Well, the Iranian response today was unequivocal. For example, Ismail Qasawi, deputy commander of Tehran's Sarola Revolutionary Guards base, saying the people of Iran should stand united in the face of this, and they will deliver a strong punch to the mouth of the American Secretary of State and anyone who backs them.
Hard to imagine that that is the terminology that we've come to from both the White House and other leaders. But
yes, well, we have.
Punch them in the mouth.
Indeed. Well, joining us from New York, Camelia Entekhabifard, columnist and political analyst specializing in Iran. And Camelia, we heard from Iran today, words of bluster, or was that really a reflective of the position that the Iranian government is ready to basically defy the U.S. and its sanctions on this?
Thanks for hosting me. The sanctions are effective and important, and Iranians are keen to hear what type of exact sanction would be imposed in their economical system. But at the same time, we have to remember the sanction on 2012 has been succeeded because the United States formed a coalition among of the international community, the EU's, and even China agreed and also joined those sanctions to pressure Iran for the talks which it happened to have the nuclear agreement on 2015. But today, that kind of the coalition hasn't been formed. And we are seeing a gap has been opened between the European allies of the US, and China and Russia are not supporting these current sanctions. By then, it still is too early to say if the new sanctions could be succeed and can be push this pressure on Iran, as Mr. Pompeo is asking for, to reopen another negotiation with Tehran.
Camelia, we've heard those statements from the Iranian regime that range really from saying we are sticking to the deal, we're negotiating with our European partners, to the deal is over, we're going to continue enriching uranium. A lot of mixed messages. What about the Iranian public? How do you think they've been reacting? What have you observed?
Iranian public, I'm assuming they would be happy if they were more hearing about sanctions on the Revolutionary Guards, on the people associated with the regime, such as the travel ban, etc. But that kind of the messages, it didn't exactly says to them what plan Mr. Pompeo and President Trump have for the plan B on Iran. Is it kind of the regime change, which he didn't say, but some conservatives read from the messages that because of the list is too long and it cannot be fulfilled by Iran, at the bottom it would be the regime change plan with the U.S., but we didn't see that. Pompeo clearly asked for the negotiation and said they are ready to negotiate with Tehran when the regime is available for that. Iranians are upset. They don't know why they have to be sanctioned travel to the United States when the official easily, like Mr. Zarif, can grant these advantages to travel anytime, come to the U.S. and have those publicity appearing on American TV, media, and the newspapers. But for the Iranian average, that option has been closed. They were not too sure to see how the United States can push Iran back from the region when, for example, Hezbollah is part of the government of Lebanon and is still the United States sending the fund to the government. So if there is a plan to confronting Hezbollah, first the United States has to confront the government of Lebanon to close those access of the money transfer to Hezbollah. That kind of the question has been raised among the Iranians, and they were thinking why Russia hasn't to be pushed to ask Iranian leave Syria and etc. They are waiting to hear more detail about what Mr. Pompeo has been proposed.
Camelia, there are some analysts who say by Secretary of Pompeo putting forward a maximalist position, playing the bad cop, so to speak, that may help the Europeans get some concessions out of the Iranian government by being more of the good cop in response, saying, well, give us at least this, if this is what the U.S. is asking. Is that kind of approach a viable technique or strategy when dealing with the Iranian government?
Iranian, in my opinion, now they would act more wisely and they would stick to the deal despite of their previous position. They said if the United States leave the deal, they would tour the deal. Now they decided to stay on the deal because they are counting on Europe and they are counting on Ms. Mogherini and the European Union to see what kind of the leverages in exchange of not restarting their nuclear facilities can be granted, even though if there wouldn't be too much, if it wouldn't be too high, still Iranians want to play this card to wait for the next presidential election in the United States. And in the coming 2 years, I'm assuming they would be more careful of what would they say, what do they act, even though today Mr. Rouhani hasn't played hard in return to Mr. Secretary Pompeo's approaches yesterday. They just play that cool, and they don't want to have that kind of frontier with the United States, which it caused an absolute confrontation. And at the same time, they are so much counting on the gap open with the GCC members. We heard Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain were supporting yesterday's speeches by Mr. Pompeo, but we have to know Kuwait and Oman and Qatar wouldn't support that kind of the aggression on Iran, especially new sanctions. And that it actually makes Iran to be benefited most, even though if we have more sanctions in the coming days from these gaps has been open in GCC.
All right, Camelia Entekhabifard in New York. Great to have your insight, as always. Just to note, Kalev, that, I mean, she makes me think about if you link North Korea and Iran, two very different situations, different negotiations, but in both cases, the Trump administration is setting the bar extremely high. With Iran, they say you need to withdraw, end all your policy across the Middle East, and support for Hezbollah and involvement in Yemen. For North Korea, it's denuclearization, aiming high, but whether those countries are willing to do it at all.